What's the weirdest thing you've seen at a friend's house? I thought that it was awesome there was no furniture at my best friend's house in middle school, just mattresses on the floor and one dining room table and chairs, nothing else. In the 1980s a toy called a disc gun was popular, which would shoot out a spinning piece of plastic about the size of a nickel. No furniture or really much of anything in the apartment meant we couldn't lose the discs. In reality it was that my friend's mom had been killed in an accidental shooting and his father was so depressed he had trouble caring for the family. They moved regularly and had no furniture. A pancake on the stairs, no plate, just a bare pancake. When I asked why there was a pancake on the stair, my friend responded, because I didn't want to eat it, as if that explained anything. I went to visit this friend for the first time and she gave me a house tour. I remember there was a hallway with two standard-sized doors, her and her sister's room respectively, and a purple mini door at the end of the hallway. It reached just about my mid-thigh. She didn't open that door, just told me it was her parents' bedroom, but later I saw her parents in the living room and they were regular-sized people. Until this day I ask myself how and why. This was back in the 90s, in case that matters. A family friend's dog had died. I ended up going over a few days later to play basketball, and the dog was laying in its usual spot, in a small bed near the TV in the living room. I said, "Oh, I thought Spot passed," and he said he did. They left the fucking dead dog just laying there. Turns out they were gonna bury it that weekend, when sister could come home from college, but in the meantime they just left it laying there. WTF, it was emaciated old chihuahua, so it's not like it was a gassy, swollen, stinking mess. More like a tiny little dog mommy, all dried out and shit, but still. Who fucking does that? Her mom had a white room, white carpet, white couch, a piano and a credenza filled with china and figurines. Nobody was allowed to ever go in there because it would dirty the room. Couch was covered in plastic, I think. It was just bizarre to me as a 5-year-old to have a room that nobody can go in. Other friends. Unfortunately, you see how many people are hoarders. That, or I just somehow made friends with lots of kids of hoarders. A series of tunnels, secret passages and hidden rooms. My childhood friend thought it was perfectly normal and couldn't explain why his parents had turned his average-looking home into a maze. For a visitor, finding a bathroom or even the kitchen was frustrating. The owners were amused. So weird. Lol, one day my sister and her friends had gotten home from school early somehow, and they all hid behind our couch to jump out and scare me as I had taken the bus and walked from the stop in my neighborhood to home. I chose that day, very hot and humid, to walk through the door and immediately take off my pants, exclaiming that I have the worst case of swamp ass right now. Cue them all jumping out laughing their asses off. I'd never done that before, never did after. I was in 9th grade and finally gaining self-confidence and figuring myself out, so I just said this is Anya all and walked upstairs. They all occasionally mention it to this day. I helped a buddy pull an engine, load it onto his truck, and then move it from his truck into his garage. His garage smelled awful. While moving the engine, I happened to slip and fall, noticing something terrifying in the process. His garage was essentially his basement, on dirt, no concrete or anything. His main sewage pipes were suspended under the house by twine. There was a large hole dug in the ground and one pipe went straight down into the hole, but ended about 3 down. I asked him what in this flying hell was going on, and he told me that's how the house was when he bought it. Apparently the house was built long before the city put in sewers, and there was no septic tank either. The previous owner had dug a tunnel under the house leading to a storm drain. How this passed inspection is beyond me. Maybe the inspector assumed there was a septic tank down there or something. But That did explain the big hole around the pipe. Apparently it would get clogged up with toilet paper and they had to dig it out with shovels. At age 12 I went round to the house of a neighborhood boy who I guess qualified as a friend at the time. He had a NES, which interested me as I grew up in a Sega household. "Oh, yeah," he said casually, playing with the Stretch Armstrong. "That thing. My mom stabbed her boyfriend and he collapsed onto it, so it doesn't work anymore." This was my first exposure to not just the world of adults, but the world of super fucked up adults who stab each other. I just burst into tears. Last time I saw the kid, he was being loaded into the back of a police van, after something bad happened in his home. His mother did not leave the house with him. Not particularly something I've seen, thank God, but something my friend told me. I asked her where the toilet paper was in the bathroom and she said, "We don't really wipe our butts in this house." Girl, what? Edit, they did not have a bidet. Multiple topless photos of mom framed all around the living room. Apparently she did a photo shoot as an anniversary present for Dad. I couldn't think of enough excuses to be in the living room. Was hanging out with this girl at her house for the first time. Huge, lovely house that she lived in with a couple roommates. Her one roommate was apparently obsessed with the actress Jennifer Garner, and above the fireplace on the mantel was this really strange Jennifer Garner shrine. Giant, at least 5-foot tall poster of Jennifer above the mantel, and then tons of candles, small pictures, autographs, and trinkets on the mantel itself. I don't think it was anything too weird, but who TF is praying to Jennifer Garner every day? Their parents loving each other, showing everyday tenderness, a peck on the cheek here and there, fighting and then resolving it like it's no big deal. I was mid-20s when I finally figured out that some people are married because they genuinely like each other. The stands and ropes usually used at movie theaters and amusement parks. My friend's family used them to direct traffic through carpeted areas so that the rugs wouldn't get wear patterns on them. The mom would move them at regular intervals. A giant pair of pants that weren't theirs. Back in the day, my fiancée, now my wife, and I went to the Goodwill once and saw a giant pair of pants for sale. When I say giant, I mean these things were comically large. I'm a pretty big guy and I could fit in one leg. You could put 3 people in these pants and button and zip them with no problem. Not only that, but whoever had them before was so large they were busting the crotch out of them. Seeing these pants for sale, we did what any normal person would do and bought them with the intent of having as much fun with them as possible. I don't remember who came up with the idea, but we eventually started taking them to friends' houses. My wife would shove them in a rather large purse she had, and after we had been at that friend's place for a while she would excuse herself to go to the bathroom. While she was in there she'd pull the pants out and hide them in the friend's dirty laundry hamper and then come back out without saying anything. Imagine doing your laundry and at one point pulling out a pair of pants that are so big there is nobody you even know that would wear such giant pants. It's one thing to find another person's underwear in your house, but a pair of pants that huge is another thing altogether. Almost every time we'd end up getting a phone call asking if we'd left pants at their house, though, just because it seems like something we would do. Friend F: may I use the bathroom? Friend M: her partner. At the next ad break. Friend F: thank you. I'm on board with D.S. relationships. I get it, nothing I haven't seen before, but the golden rule is that you either tell outsiders you're going 24/7 or you act normal when they're around. Nobody wants to be mixed up in your sex games. Edit, I should say, they were def kinky, not abusive. They were, and presumably still are, well known for their escapades in the scene. I went over to a friend's house and he lived in a really bad part of town. Not only was his house really run down with very little furniture, but there were porno mags out in the open on a coffee table. I was like 12 at the time. A friend from school was the son of a vicar, so their house was provided by the church. There was a downstairs toilet at the end of a hall under the stairs, but you could open the cupboard under the stairs and there was a handy window to view into the toilet, which always seemed very weird. Back when I was a senior in high school, I had all of my required credits, so I had early release where I go to leave school a period early. I convinced my best friend to cut her last class and come hang out with me. She wanted to go home to change before we went out, so I drove her home and we walked into her house too. Her dad jacking in on the family computer to a live webcam girl. This was back when most families had one PC in a neutral area for the whole family. Considering that guy was basically my second dad, it was even worse. We just ran straight up the stairs and shouted, "Hey, we're home early." Couldn't look him in the eye for years after. I went to HS in the 80s. My friend lived in a nice neighborhood and his parents were typical white-collar suburbanites. There was a bong and a glass jar with about half an ounce of weed on the coffee table. It belonged to his parents. Apparently they smoked together. It was bizarre for a 17-year kid to see. A sex machine. It was about the size of a 10-gallon aquarium. There were two stuffed chihuahuas inside on a type of revolving machine. When you put a quarter in, it started up and one chihuahua popped up onto the other and started vigorously drilling it from behind. It was weirdly fascinating. He kept it on top of his refrigerator and rigged the coin slot so it did not need coin to operate, so every single time someone went in to get a beer you'd hear it start up. A big black trash bag completely crammed full of vintage adult VHS tapes. One time I slept over at his house. I got to borrow his sister's room to sleep in, since she was away for the weekend. It was very dark when I went to sleep, so I didn't really see anything in there, but when I woke up in the morning I could see that the room was completely plastered with posters and pictures of Leonardo DiCaprio. Not a single piece of the room was untouched by his presence, and they were all looking at me passionately and seductively. This happened sometime in 1998, so pictures of him in a young girl's room wasn't surprising at all, but waking up to this as a 10-11-year-old boy was quite a weird experience. Whenever I see a picture or video or hear the name of that guy, I can only think of this room. I spent the night at a friend's house in middle school. When I woke up, my friend was gone, so I walked into the kitchen and everyone was fully dressed, having a huge breakfast, and they looked at me like, "Look who finally woke up." They didn't make me breakfast because I didn't wake up, so they offered me cereal. An old friend was really into figure skating and her parents would record the competitions late night on Sky Sports for her so she could watch them after school. One day during lunch hour, we went to her house and she put last night's video on, and whoever had stayed up the night before to tape it decided to do some channel surfing during the adverts and kept turning to the gay porn channel and then flipping back to see if the skating was back on, then flipping back to the action again. My friend was out of the room sorting out food, so she never saw it. I casually asked her if she ever watched the adverts because they were a bit weird. Obviously I knew it was from a porn channel, and she said no, I just fast forward through those. This was also the early 90s. VHS players were still very primitive in what they could do. I asked her which of her parents stay up and she responded with sometimes mom, sometimes dad, sometimes they both stay up. So yeah, one or possibly both of her parents liked watching late-night hardcore gay porn. I went over to a neighbor's house in the 90s a few months after we moved into the neighborhood. They had a son who was a year younger than me and a daughter who was 4 years younger than her brother. We were hanging out in the garage shooting, passing a hockey puck around when we decided to take a break and have a slight snack. The brother was eating a chocolate bar of some kind and was finishing his last mouthful when his sister walked in the garage and wanted some of the candy even though it was basically gone. This is where it gets fucking weird. Her brother jokingly sticks out a portion of chewed-up chocolate bar and asks her if she still wants some. She replies with a serious yes, and he proceeded to transfer some of his chewed chocolate bar directly into his sister's mouth like a bird. To this day I have hard time not visualizing them French kissing a chewed-up chocolate bar when I see them at their parents' house visiting. Friends dating a guy asked me to come pick her up from his place because he had to go on an emergency call. I get to his place and, on the living room table is a stuffed raccoon sitting on a toilet smoking a cigarette and reading the newspaper. I kid you not. A friggin' marble bust, or maybe it was just white stone, I can't tell exactly. I was young. Of Benito Mussolini at one of my friend's house. They had it at the entrance of the house, a splendid villa in Italy. Edit for context, the grandpa still lived in the house along with his son, wife and nephew, my childhood friend. After leaving middle school I didn't see this kid anymore due to being in different schools, but if I had to take a guess now after 15 years, well, they were probably a bunch of fascists. A padded bedroom my friend uses, his grandpa used to live with them and his son, my friend's dad, made sure he wouldn't hurt himself. It even had a shower and toilet and sink and a mini fridge. My friend told me that his grandpa's last year being alive it was filled with junk food and sodas and juice. Room was fun to play in. Also, his older brother thought of himself a werewolf and had a big cage for himself in his own room. I had dinner with him and he had the bloodiest steak I've ever seen. His collar was awesome though, had the spikes and his own name tag. His parents were supportive and even got him a doggy bed for the cage. Not only did my parents walk around the house naked, 1980s England, but until I was about 11. If they were visiting friends with kids they would put us both in the bath so they could go be adults without us. The weirdest thing, which unfortunately happened a few times, was while visiting one of my friends who had a few issues. He would, at the age of at least 10, shed the bath, and yet our mothers still did this. I can only assume they were snorting coke in the other room or something. Actually that would make a lot more sense of my childhood come to think of it. His mom would check on us periodically, and I have a vivid memory of her coming in and saying, "Jim, you've done it again," at which point he turned around, looked at the turd behind his ass with wide surprised eyes and said, "Well, it wasn't me." I didn't much look forward to visiting him. Probably a little insensitive saying it was weird, but I went to a friend's house as my parents went away somewhere for a long weekend, and in the living room there was a bed with loads of medical equipment and this other boy wrapped up like in a cocoon with just his face visible and staring fully at a TV that was clearly just for him to watch. Medical equipment like hair and tunes and those vital readings, and one was definitely forcing air into this kid's mouth and nose. I never knew about this kid from my friend, so when we went upstairs I asked him, and it was like the toughest thing ever for him to say he had a sick brother who needed round-the-clock care. Such a shame seeing a young kid probably 8 or 9 like that. I think the weird part was that I just didn't know and it came out of the blue. A pot of 40 years old butter, did not taste it, and a system of sandstone hideout tunnels from 18th century. Accessible from an old well in the yard. A different friend, a black dried severed hand of some saint in a glass box. He works as antiquities restorator. Somewhere else, a complete lack of bathroom. I asked the friend where the toilet is, and it turned out it just isn't. She led me, holding my hand, through a wardrobe to a neighboring flat in complete darkness and told me we absolutely, under no circumstances, should wake up their baby. else she has a big problem. And beware the scattered Lego pieces and bowls with cat food. I almost accidentally stepped into their bedroom where they were sleeping, as they had a curtain for a door. The flat, giant kitchen and bedroom was exceptionally cheap for a center of Prague, she said. A bathtub full of snakes. It was 1996 and I, then 13, was walking around the town with my mates. I needed to pee and my mate W said I could use the bathroom at his house. His house was huge. We lived in a village that was mostly 2-3-bed terraces and semis, but this was a double-fronted, detached house in a tiny, hidden avenue and the inside was beautiful. I reached the bathroom, shut the door, pulled down my pants and sat down. As I was peeing, a movement caught my eye: the snakes in the bath. Suffice to say it's a good job my ass was already over the bowl. Not ashamed to say that I didn't even wipe. I almost fell down the stairs getting out of the house and I never went back. On a related note, W was prosecuted for the murder of our other friend's father about 2 years after this. Stabbed him 17 times during a robbery.